Welcome, everyone, to the AI in Business podcast. I'm Matthew DeMello, Editorial Director here at Emerge AI Research. Today's guest is Tomer Paran, Chief Evangelist and Vice President of Strategy at ActiveFence. ActiveFence is a technology company specializing in trust and safety solutions, helping platforms detect and prevent harmful content, malicious activity, and emerging threats online. Tomer joins today's podcast to explore the critical role of red teaming in AI safety and security. He breaks down the challenges enterprises face in deploying AI responsibly, the evolving nature of adversarial risks, and why organizations must adopt a proactive approach to testing AI systems. From the origins of red teaming in military strategy to its essential role in today's generative AI landscape, Tomer shares insights from his work advising enterprises on building effective AI safety frameworks. He discusses how different industries from finance to healthcare to consumer platforms must tailor red teaming strategies to address their unique risks while balancing security and functionality. Today's episode is part of a special series on AI-driven trust and safety sponsored by ActiveFence. And without further ado, here's our conversation. Tomer, thanks so much for being with us on the program this week.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We've had a lot of different conversations just about responsible AI from a broad range of industries. Those conversations tend to be industry specific, if only, when we're talking to life sciences folks or financial services, maybe they're putting a broader spin on it that's really relevant to legacy industries. Just talking to someone who's got just such broad experience, especially in the security space and serving a broad range of industries. What do you see as the biggest challenges, regardless of space, that enterprises have in deploying AI responsibly?
Yeah, I think you're right that every industry has its own concerns, but there are kind of commonalities that we see across industries, whether you're looking at, tech companies, healthcare companies, consumer apps, financial services, all kind of industries that have done a lot as far as, or at least plan to do a lot in terms of digital transformation using GenAI. I think the commonality is that they all have unique policies to their industries, sometimes to their geographies and to their companies even, that they all have a challenge making sure that their generative AI applications, whether for external use, but even more so for external use, but also for internal use, adhere to their policies. Those are data governance policies, access management, confidentiality, what kind of information they want or don't want their AI to provide their customers or employees. All of these challenges are common. Of course, the differences are in the details, right? Like a healthcare company is going to have very different things that they don't want to expose customers to than, say, a travel hospitality enterprise.
Absolutely. And I think there's just been a lot in the media, maybe the biggest headline a lot of the lay listeners may have heard in this term is Sam Altman going before Congress and using this phrase red teaming, which ends up being a really great use case all around. It's a very wide area. You guys have a lot of experience, advising enterprises, building solutions around the general principles of red teaming. Tell us a little bit about what that means to enterprises across industries and how that relates to driving responsible AI adoption workflows.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I returned from the Paris AI Action Summit, and I think red team was one of the top 10 words that, buzzwords that I heard at the conference. It's being used across the board by academia, AI safety and security institutes, nonprofits, as well as commercial vendors like us. As well as even inside these LLMs and GenAI powered app companies that have their own internal programs for red teaming. So it's definitely a widely used term, but for good reason. It's one of the most effective ways, especially in a system like GenAI that I'll explain, in order to achieve kind of the desired levels of safety and security. What red team is, to take it a step back to your question, is kind of a system that developed, even in kind of early physical security, military contexts, where the need to understand, how an adversary might react to the defenses that we set up or to an offensive maneuver and wanting to simulate that in order to improve our approach, specifically in the context of defense or even cyber defense. It's how do we improve our, security posture, safety posture, defense posture, knowing how the enemy or how the adversary might behave. In the context of ActiveFence, we've been red teaming for since we were founded in 2018. We started by kind of pioneering red teaming and even I'd say threat intelligence, another kind of commonly used military and cybersecurity practice that we bring into this world of trust and safety and AI safety. Are essentially one, threat intelligence collect information from the adversary. What are they talking about? How are they planning? What tools they're using, strategies they're deploying, and so on. And red teaming is kind of taking those learnings and understanding how we can apply them and test our defenses so we can proactively, fix our posture. That's at the kind of high level. The reason why it's been so effective in AI is that because AI is, as is often it's referred to a black box, it's very hard to understand its inner workings and what we have to change algorithmically or in the training data set in order to improve alignment of whatever output is with the desired response we'd have. So really poking at it and seeing what it provides us is one of the best methods to do that.
Just to even kind of read between the lines of your answer, it seemed like the term in its Cold War origins and its military origins really seemed to intersect when you had AI jump from deterministic capabilities based on rules and very simple systems to the generative space, which has been, so to speak, in the last 2 to 3 years, we've all kind of felt an explosion. It's really with these probabilistic capabilities that you need to game out, how does this look on the output side and then work backwards in terms of what you're saying for the black box problem and see where the problem is in your data gathering process. Because we know from many conversations we've had on the show, that's the front lines of responsible AI. It's where in the data did you go wrong to produce the output. But you need this special approach that has this military background, because the only way you're going to know this from these new generative systems is in the output side and then work backwards from there. Do I generally have that right, or am I putting this in too small a box?
Yeah, I think that's right, but it's even hard to work backwards because it's hard with these systems to see like, okay, here's a prompt, here's a response that I don't want. It's an undesired response, whether it's misinformation or it talks about my competitor or whatever it is. It's sometimes very hard to work back the reasoning, right? Like the chain of thought of the AI. But sometimes that's not even necessary because if we have sets, a training data set of bad prompts and bad outputs, or even good prompts and bad outputs, we can train against that data set and sort of retrain our model to perform better in the next iterations. Right. So I feel like that's the advantage of these kind of, reinforcement learning systems, is that we don't necessarily have to understand how it got to its first conclusion, but we can train it how to do better in the next iteration.
Absolutely. And as with anything that kind of has a military background, hell, the internet has a military background if we're getting into where things came from. They have this appeal, I think, to defensive organizations first. And that's not just a pun. I think it goes, very much beyond there in terms of history, where these logos really came up in the history of the 20th century and technology being largely driven in the Cold War. That'll be another podcast for another time. But just thinking about, what kinds of organizations need this distinct red teaming approach outside of its status as a buzzword. And we'll remember that even buzzwords like sustainability stuck with us for 15 years and for very, very good reason, even outside of kind of like how it's used in marketing language. But what kind of organizations need red teaming, and how should they think about laying those first steps to maybe some sort of framework that can work for them in terms of implementing this kind of process?
Yeah, look, we're still asking that question ourselves, right? Like we have got into red teaming because, as I mentioned, even prior to generative AI exploding, we had been doing red teaming for some of the largest tech organizations to see how, to test the defenses that they had for user-generated content safety, right? Like, how can we upload an illicit video? How can we bypass the identity verification of a platform? How can we create fake accounts on a dating app? All of that was red teaming. What happened with generative AI is just these new platforms and these new tools and this new type of technology emerged. But the concept of red teaming, how do I misuse, abuse, manipulate this platform or the users of this platform, remained constant. We just moved to the next platform to do it. I will also say, as we're mentioning frequently, kind of the military aspect of it and the adversarial aspect of red teaming, that is a big part of red teaming. But there are a lot of red team exercises, which is how does a good user, a benign user that wants to say, generate a book cover, and how do I generate this book cover without getting, discrimination, hate, abuse, misinformation in my book cover, even if my prompt was completely benign. So it's important to make that distinction that red teaming spans a very large spectrum of use cases. Many of those are adversarial, right? But many of them are benign.
Absolutely. And in that broad swath of the use case, where do we get, or what do you think are the basic dynamics of at least getting that framework together? Just for, what kind of organization that you might have, what are the basic tenets, if any, depending on the organization?
Yeah. So to your question on the organizations, right? Initially, we thought, as we were kind of pulled into red teaming by large language models companies, we thought, okay, if we help make their LLM safe, then all these downstream users, whether it's developers building GenAI apps or enterprises in the travel, consumer goods, and tech sectors, adopt OpenAI and Claude and Gemini and Cohere and all these different LLMs. If we make it safe at the source, that'll likely make it safe downstream. What we were surprised to find is that when these developers or these enterprises take these models, connect them to their system, to their users, to their enterprise data, to APIs, to train it on additional open source information or proprietary information, connected to RAGs and all these different elements, then you get something which is kind of an entirely different safety risk. And then we realized, hey, these guys need red teaming just as much, because now that, say, this airline or this e-commerce website implemented these LLMs, it now has, first of all, an entirely different set of risks that they look at that an LLM wouldn't necessarily look at, right? So we work with, Amazon, we work with Cohere, and with many other LLMs. Their concerns maybe are of a higher severity safety, right? They don't want misuse for political propaganda or creation of child sexual abusive material. When you bring it down to the airline that's using this LLM, they maybe care about an entirely different set of risks, right? Like not talking about my competitors or providing private information of my customers or confidential roadmap issues. So we figured that the set of risks are different, but even to take it back to those kind of more severe risks, once you connected it to different systems, different data sets, retrained it, you might have opened it up to safety issues that were previously safeguarded by the LLM. I'll say one more point on that. What we've also noticed is that these LLM companies, for good reason, they are trying to push out the best models as fast as possible, right? Safety is important to them, but they're competing amongst each other on performance of these models, how good these models are, and how fast they can release it, right? They want to release it before one another or closely to one another to not fall behind in terms of competition. So where safety ranks on their importance is high, but not as high as performance and speed to market, time to market. When United or United Healthcare or CVS or Airbnb launches a GenAI application, they might be okay taking an extra 3 months to release it as long as it doesn't release private information, right? So we also have to consider the fact that they might not have the same safety first performance preferences as the LLMs. Yeah, so all this to say, there are a wide spectrum of organizations that need to safeguard their GenAI applications. And to your point on framework, what we generally see, and this is broad, is that the first step is really understanding what safety means to you, right? I mentioned this now, but to Airbnb, it might mean something very different than to CVS, than to United Airlines. So those companies each need to think of what policies they want, what considers safe, and what is safe enough, because there is no absolute safety. That's also kind of an important thing to remember.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your point at the end there, just about kind of partially the incentives, partially really just what makes sense in terms of the approach that leads different models to prioritize safety versus performance. You talked a lot about, at least setting the basic tenets for policies there, depending on what kind of organization that you have. Obviously, the variables change so much when we're thinking about different kinds of organizations, different kinds of industries, but just any general advice that you have for building these frameworks based on, the essential tenets of red teaming for folks across industries?
So first of all, I think for any responsible AI organization, it's important to understand kind of where they sit on the trade-off between safety and functionality, security and functionality, right? What is safe enough for them, and what is a good enough user experience, and kind of that trade-off. It's not a zero sum, but you do kind of have to understand that there is a trade-off and where you sit on it as an organization. And then understanding that red teaming is not a project that you do, but a program that you build, right? So build it for sustainability, for longevity. Then I think the other consideration that you need to make is, the build versus buy or the hybrid model, right? What range of risks, and, we're discuss that in a bit, but what range of risks do you have? What kind of risk exposure do you have? Whether it's adversarial risk, compliance risk, data integrity, confidentiality, privacy, and so on. What risks do you face? And then ultimately, the frequency you'll have to do this program, but ultimately you have to choose, how much in-house, how much out-house, and how much hybrid you're going to deploy. And then it's important to kind of map out what risks you want to red team, right? What benign actor risk and what adversarial actor risks you want to secure your model against. It's important to determine, like I mentioned, success, right? Like when is training our model, when is the output we see good enough to release this product or this model? Continually run diagnostics on it, right? So, after we've released it, that continual monitoring is important, so that when we could bring it back to the sandbox or the next iteration, we could red team on those things that went wrong when we went live last time, right? And I feel like if you kind of do all those steps, that's at least at the higher level, the framework that every organization, and this applies, kind of across industries and product types.
In that way, you paint a very vivid picture of a lot of these companies really thinking that they probably can lean more on build versus buy, right? Like they can probably red team or work out any of their safety responsibility issues for these models internally. And that kind of sounds on paper a little bit more safe. At the end of the day, though, and this is just me speaking as the host of the show, talking to a lot of different folks across this industries, it makes a lot of strategic sense, of course, just right on the surface, to have a third party do this red teaming. You want somebody from the outside. Just the basic advantages of anything third party. You don't have that built-in bias of knowing how the inner organization works. Take us to the next level, just in terms of the value of using third parties to, help an enterprise really drive a true red teaming process according to their goals, as you were saying before.
Well, I'll start by saying, Matthew, that a lot of our large customers also have internal red teaming programs, which I think are valuable.
Why not both, right?
Yeah, no, it's sometimes there are things that that benefit very much from an in-house program. Oftentimes you benefit from an outsourced program. And in some cases, and this is all kind of a risk-based approach, right? Like, what are your risks? How wide are your risks, right? Are you worried about a very narrow set of risks, or are you worried about a wide set of risks? Do you have a wide range of users to this application? Is it kind of a social media, and then you'll get kids and adults and people talking politics and sports? Or is this a shopping assistant that's going to help people? So it's very use case dependent. It's very much an audience dependent thing. It's a volume. It's what kind of data you're connecting and what allowances you're giving this GenAI, LLM or even agent, even more risky, right? Like, what actions are you allowing this agent to take? That's going to dictate what levels of risk. If you look at your entire kind of risk surface and understand, that you have a wider set of risks that maybe require a wider set of expertise, you should lean towards an external program, right? Unless you want to hire tons of subject matter expertise in different areas, that's going to be very difficult. If your red teaming program, if you're like a Salesforce.com that's going to launch a GenAI product every 3 weeks, right? And is going to require constant red teaming versus something that is more sporadic, right? Maybe if you have constant red teaming needs, you should develop some in-house capabilities, right? So there's many different considerations, and I've given just two, kind of, how wide set of risks and how frequent is your model releases or your product releases. But there are a ton of considerations to make here. What I've seen across the board is that when you have adversarial risk, right, which is something that, for example, ActiveFence specializes in, it's very hard to get your in-house staff to think like an adversary. Whether that adversary is a fraudster, a hate group, a propagandist, a state actor, whatever that is, very hard to put yourself in the mindset of those types of adversaries. And if your needs are fluctuating all the time, like you're gonna release a model in Korea now, and now you release a model for kids, and now you release something that's supposed to be more B2B. And are you going to have subject matter expertise in-house across all these areas? Or can you lean on a vendor that can suck on a different part of its organization to pull in the right subject matter expertise and linguists and so on to create the red teaming exercise that you need right there and then?
Right. And just with the point you made right at the end there about fraud detection, you could have sounded like any number of guests we've had on the show, from retail and especially financial services. And even when you get used to one kind of enemy, and for the retail folks, I tend to call them the new James Bond villains of like the, organized fraudsters that have a slightly larger network, and they're able to leverage a lot of these new generative AI tools that are really changing the game. Even when you get used to the organized criminals that kind of came before generative AI, that new change in technology that gives, in many ways, and I'm summarizing way too much of a podcast if you can't tell, many ways gives that generative AI step level change, gives really the other side, the mouse side of the table, the advantages over the cat side of the table. Then things change, and it may become more valuable, as you're saying in this last answer, to have a third party that's more specialized in not just an enemy that but an enemy with a new tool, which ends up making them an enemy that you don't know. And I think there's also so many considerations here to even factor into the formula you're putting out there. We know from retail folks, they're much more conscious about making sure that the customer experience is very smooth. Maybe they have a more open-minded sense of the cost of doing business in terms of there's a certain allowable amount of fraud, but only because we've done the math and this is what it means to have the smoothest bottom line that doesn't hurt the bottom line that we're getting from the customer. So many considerations right there. And then on top of that, even the bankers that would come on the show and have similar answers, they have a completely different approach to their customer experiences, the list of fraudsters that they're dealing with. They might be a little bit more international. You mentioned state actors. So just a way for our listeners to kind of listen back to through some previous shows that we've done on the subject and see through the lens of the formula you're putting out there where that might might be different from organization to organization. I know it's always very, very difficult to describe these things when so much of the answer comes down to it depends, but you've put a really, really clear-cut formula here, at least in terms of the variations that need to be involved and the variables that need to be considered when driving a red teaming process, depending on where you are in the industry and what kind of organization you are. Tomer, I know we're just about out of time. Really appreciate you being with us for this show. I think the audience got so much out of it, especially for this buzzword as it mostly gets presented in the media.
Very happy to be here, Matthew. I think it's an important topic that's going to rise more and more to prominence. And I think that, to your last point, kind of, when you're a company like ActiveFence that looks at so many industries, but even within an industry has expertise, the ability to tap on us and tap into, really talking even more generally, a vendor that works across multiple companies, right? So if you're a bank, and we've worked with 7 banks, the experience of red teaming their applications plays into what we do with you. But also the fact we work with insurers and airlines and retailers, they have unique issues that have taught us and have kind of, allowed us to implement those learnings in, banking use cases, red team. So it really does play a factor to use a third party, even just for that benefit.
Absolutely. And you bring up something I think we're all kind of experiencing with generative AI, whether you have a ChatGPT account or you're using some other vendor for whatever you do in your life. You kind of realize that as we go along, these applications are getting more used to how you do things and more used to how other people with similar workflows that are also using this application are getting used to things. And that can really make these technologies grow better and smarter and faster at what they do. All a part of that very simple machine learning technical aspect at the heart of these systems, but also something that makes the future very, very exciting in ways that you were just describing there. Tomer, really appreciate you being with us for the last 30 minutes. Very insightful information, I think, across industries here.
Thank you, Matthew. Yeah, looking forward to hearing it.
Wrapping up today's episode, I think we heard 3 big takeaways from Tomer on today's show. First, red teaming is essential for AI safety and security. Organizations must proactively stress test their AI models to identify vulnerabilities before bad actors do. It's not just about compliance, it's about resilience in an evolving threat landscape. Secondly, different industries require tailored AI risk strategies. Whether in finance, healthcare, or consumer tech, enterprises need customized approaches to red teaming that align with their specific regulatory and operational challenges. And finally, companies must decide between building in-house capabilities and leveraging external expertise. Many organizations are turning to third-party specialists to simulate real-world threats, ensuring their AI applications remain secure, compliant, and aligned with business objectives. If you enjoyed or benefited from the insights of today's episode, consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. Let us know what you learned, found helpful, or just liked most about the show. Also, don't forget to follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter, @Emerge, and that's spelled EMERJ, as well as our LinkedIn page. I'm your host, Matthew DeMello, editorial director here at Emerge AI Research. On behalf of Daniel Fagella, our CEO and head of research, as well as the rest of the team here at Emerge. Thanks so much for joining us today, and we'll catch you next time on the AI in Business podcast.